Welcome. My name's Evan Troxel, and I am the Architectural Community Director here at TECT. And over the last couple of decades as an architect, I have built an incredible network of people, both professionals and friends, and I reached out to them to ask them to share insight with you. Now, this video is really aimed at you if you're a student or if you're an early career professional. And even if you're beyond that, I still think that you would love to hear what these insightful people had to say. But I asked them, knowing what they know now, everything from designing a building with capital A architectural principles, all the way to specifying every single piece that goes into a building. There's a huge spectrum of jobs to do within that process. And so, taking that all into consideration, what would they tell students and early career professionals to give them a head start to get off on the right foot as they start navigating this career? And then also, what do they have to look forward to? Because they've experienced so much. So without further ado, let's hear what they have to say.
There's like 3 top things that I wish somebody would have told me very early in my career, or made more clear to me how important they were. There's so many things you're going to learn in this industry, and you're going to wake up every day feeling like you know less than the day before, because it's never ending. If you don't think you have anything left to learn, you need to get out of this business. But some things that I think would have pole vaulted my career a lot sooner and made me feel more confident in the work I did. Number 1, learning how a project is delivered and who's responsible for what and what a contract document is and how they play into what you're putting on your drawings or in your specs or how you're delivering your project. Architects don't get that in school. Or if they do, they have one practice class that barely touches on it. And it's so important because everything you touch is affected by that. But nobody tells you from cradle to grave who's responsible for what, why you do the things you do, not just that you do them. You see a whole lot of just do this, but nobody tells you why you should do it that way. So the first one would be project delivery education, because it changes the way you look at every single thing you do for the entire rest of your career. The second one would be understanding how the other disciplines you have to work with work. It took me, I was 22 years in an architecture firm, my first job in the industry. And then 2008 happened, I lost my job, and I went to work for an MEP consulting firm. And I spent the first 22 years of my career complaining about how consultants didn't do anything right. I would just grouse about it constantly. And then I went to work for an MEP firm, and it was like this light came on. It's a completely different workflow, and the architect is not giving me the information I need to do my job right. And this communication and coordination, your building doesn't happen without every single member of that project team. And if you don't know how to communicate with them, or you're not at least dangerous enough to ask them the right questions or to look at the right things in their work and coordinate that with yours, you're going to be struggling and failing and struggling through construction for a long time until you figure it out. And for me, it was 22 years till I got that insight. So now in my career, I've worked in architecture, construction, MEP engineering, and now building science. I don't look at a project the same way as almost any architect I know. I ask questions nobody else asks because I got that exposure. Now, I'm not saying a young architect can go work in a bunch of different disciplines, but spend some time in it. And if you're in school, that's a good time to go interview some different consulting firms or owners or contractors, all disciplines on the team, and say, tell me what your day looks like, and how do you work, and what things are important to you, and where do architects fail by the time they're dealing with you. It's invaluable education. The number 3 is maximize your product representatives. I just saw them as salesmen to avoid for a very large period of my earlier career. They know more about what you're doing with whatever part of your building you're designing than anybody, because that's their product you're putting in. And you want to talk about cutting your workflow, cutting your time in half to get something done. Pick up the phone and say, help me out here. I'm putting your roofing system in, or you're weatherproofing, and would you mind taking a look at this detail? They'll do all of these things for free. Do I have this right? It doesn't even cost you anything, and it cuts your time by sometimes anywhere from 20 to 90% on what you're working on. And then you learn in the process about how things need to come together on a building with all these different products you have to put together. So those would probably be, if I was sitting in a classroom with a bunch of students and I said, I'm going to give you top 3 things you should work on before you even get in the job market if you can, to get some knowledge about, those would probably be my top 3.
What is something exciting that they can look forward to join this profession?
I think that our students that are coming up and our younger professionals, the thing that's going to be most exciting for them is I think they're going to change the way we do everything we do. I do not think within the next 10 to 20 years, architecture is going to look then like it does now. I don't think the way that we do business is going to look the same. I don't think the way that we design our buildings or what we call important in that design is going to look the same, because I think our younger professionals and our students they're different animals than we are. They have been raised in a very different, like we talked about before, connected society. They communicate better. They're more innovative. They're less afraid of change. And I really think what they have to look forward to is completely upsetting the apple cart and creating a new, bigger, better architecture, engineering, and construction environment that we all live and work in.
Something you said earlier is you love working with the younger generation. How would you welcome them to the adventure they're about to kick off on?
You know, I often, when I'm talking to younger professionals or students, tell them, you need to set yourself apart and you need to find somebody like me who actually really does care about you growing and advancing in this business. So find those like-minded people. Not everybody who's a little bit older than you is afraid of change or, sitting there saying, just lazy young people that don't do anything. There are a lot more of us out there than I thought. And so I would say that the best way to get welcomed into this industry by me or anybody else is to find those kindred spirits that want to help you and see you grow, because we are out there, but you have to ask. You have to come up and say, hey, I need this from you. When I was younger, what I did is I just bugged the hell out of people. It not in an annoying way, obviously, but that asking questions and asking for help and saying that you want to grow makes you really appealing to the people above you. Young people say to me all the time, I didn't want to ask that question because I didn't want to sound stupid. I've been at this 35 plus years and I sound stupid every day if you want to use that mindset, because you're constantly learning in this industry and you stand out when you want to learn and you want to grow. So don't be afraid to walk up to the highest person that you deal with and say, I want your help. Will you help me? Or will you help guide me to somebody who can help me? And I think there's a lot of welcome in our industry from a lot of people if you just reach out.
I would say invest in let's just call it research and development of, architecture. A lot of times, and the manufacturers or software engineers or something like that really kind of like guide and take over kind of like what they feel like architects need. And architects don't really actually take control of that. And to let architects guide kind of like the future of architecture, rather than sitting back and taking a back seat to it, actually being, a positive, step forward for them by like actually advocating for developing the software as, architects, rather than having somebody else, assume what architects need as software, helping develop, construction techniques, because, we understand both the design and construction side and how those things can fit together, rather than that. So, really kind of like taking the thing that I find so amazing and interesting about the future is, it is going to, tend to be more digital, and that digital step forward has typically been controlled by somebody else, not understanding what the world of architecture is all about. And so having architects take control over that and actually be the leaders in that new revolution forward.
What is something exciting that they can look forward to when they do join the profession?
To just build upon what I was saying is like they're coming in at a time that I think is really exciting, because it is this transition from kind of like the old 2D delivery of things to this very integrated 3D process, which is how we think about how we design anyway. And so now that we're getting to this kind of like this threshold of being able to do like model-based delivery process and things like that are really going to kind of like visualize what we really want the building to be earlier and earlier on, we've got more and more control as we start to do that. And so I think they're getting into the profession at just the right time to be able to kind of like spearhead a lot of this this evolution of the digital delivery methods that right now we just, it's really hard for us to even have somebody convinced of it. And so now they'll be at the point where there may be a little bit of legwork being done by us now to like at least have people understand what digital delivery means. And now they're going to be able to like, take that and really show them the true potential. How are they going to get, fire marshals and, building officials to like fully integrate into this digital world and make it a lot easier to be able for them to, people to really understand the building better.
The most important thing, if I were to look back, would be to understand why it is that you became an architect to begin with. Like, why did you go to architecture school or pursue a design field? And I think that once you go through architecture school and go off into your career, it's easy to imagine that the reason that you're being an architect or a junior architect is to become a senior architect. And the reason you're becoming a senior architect is to become a managing director, whatever the equivalent terms are at any other firm. And that this hierarchical progression through a corporate structure is the goal that you're trying to achieve. And for me, it was somewhere in my late 20s and my early 30s where I took a pause and just asked myself, was this the whole point of architecture school to begin with? Was this why I went to studio and hung out with all my friends and made really cool designs, sometimes kind of shitty designs, but mostly pretty cool designs, and thought really consciously about the way that buildings could be, the way that neighborhoods could be, and the way that cities could be. And if you're able to keep that in the front of your mind and maybe write it down on a piece of paper and put it at your desk or wherever it is that you work, that you'll then be able to get a lot more productivity and satisfaction out of your career than you would otherwise. And I think there are certain junctures where you're able to make leaps to, for example, start your own firm or to leave traditional design and do something different, like a startup or another means or another arena of being an architect, just in a non-traditional way. Those tend to reduce as you get further and further and older because of just tons of responsibilities that you get along the way. So I would probably say that being honest with yourself about why you are an architect and what your end goals are in a very sincere and honest way, and making sure that you, in some way you're working towards that every single day. Not only, I think, will you be more productive that way, but I think you'll be a lot happier that way.
What is something exciting to look forward to in this profession or the future version of this profession?
I think that the part B would be at some point in your career when you make this shift from collecting stuff And I think that means collecting experiences, collecting knowledge, collecting names on your resume, and you switch to actually realizing that you have such a wildly interesting collection of knowledge that you're able to connect the dots really easily. And I think for me, what that is now in my mid to late 30s, is that I've had the opportunity to be so many versions of what an architect can be as a designer, as a contractor, as a developer, starting my own development company, working for a public agency or in a volunteer capacity, an appointed role, and then starting a startup focused on the real estate industry. All of these places have allowed me to gain such a wildly interesting collection of experiences where I can jump from conversation to conversation. Like I can have a deep conversation about the 20 versions of white that exist in Benjamin Moore's color palette, and then switch to talk about the future of venture capital investment in our industry and where someone may want to invest and where they may not, and what the logical reasons are. And then 100 different conversations in between. And I think being able to do that is so cool, because that builds on the years of effort that you've made before. And the question obviously is how do you then capitalize on all of that stuff? And I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I'm sure that as younger folks become more and more in their career, that there'll be in 5-10 years, there'll be even more interesting ways to capitalize on that.
Insert Steve Jobs quote here. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future.
That's exactly it. And I think that that's probably the entree or the table setting of why architects should think of themselves as much more than those that are practicing a vocation. Because if you do, then I think that you may not be giving yourself the benefit of the doubt or the opportunity to do something really transformational and really amazing. Just one tiny example. How is it that there, at least as far as I know, not a single member of the U.S. Congress that is an architect? How is that possible, given how hopeless they are and how hopeful we are? So I think there's just so many angles and so many different ways for architecture students to see and imagine their careers.
I think there are a couple things. Is one is to maybe trust your own intuition and try to seek a mentor outside of the industry as well as one inside of the industry. There were a few times where I felt like I was, either had to use my own judgment or felt like I was led astray. So I went to Cincinnati because I wanted professional practice experience, and it was a co-op program. So for me, the idea of getting an architecture education went kind of hand in hand with like the traditional way of moving into the industry and specifically getting work experience and getting for the purposes of licensure. So there were a few times in the co-op program where I had to use my own judgment. One was that we were it was strongly advised against to take like unpaid work. And I did paid work for the first two, and then I decided it was really important to my career to take unpaid work. Now, do I ethically agree with the fact that there should be unpaid work? No. Do I feel like I gained invaluable experience from taking that risk, considering all the options that were available to me at that time? Yes, I think it was worth it, and the student debt that I'm still paying off because of it. So that was like me going out on a limb against their advice. And their advice was right, but I did what was right for me in that case. And I remember that being kind of a hard decision. Another one was, this is a funny one. When I was young, I put a lot of stock into like awards and grades and, all that sort of thing that you start to lose interest in later in life. But at the time, it was really important to me to be like recognized and blah, blah, blah. So the co-op program had like a prize or a certificate for like the best co-op, I guess. Like, I don't know what that means. Like the most interesting work experience or something. And I had done the Francois Roche internship, the free one. in France, and the co-op advisor was like, I really want to give you this award, but in order for you to get this award, you have to get IDP credits for all the work you've done. And he meant like all of it, like all my co-ops, because I hadn't kept up with the IDP stuff. So I said, shit. So I had to do some like express self-addressed envelope stuff and ship it to like Delicamp Arquitectos in Mexico and Francois Roche in Paris, and I don't remember, my supervisor at KPF London and my supervisor at KPF New York. And it was pretty expensive. It was like a couple $100, which was like a lot of money to me at the time. And some of the internships didn't count because, well, there's like a cap on like, there's several caps, and I think there's a cap on international hours, and it was like one of the offices didn't have anyone licensed in their country, so that didn't count. One of the supervisors never got back to me despite me like begging and pleading for like a month. And what ended up happening was I spent like a couple $100 and got like 0 IDP credits anyway, which is what I had been planning on doing. And I didn't get the award even for trying. And for me, there was like a little bit of a lesson in that, which is like my instinct had been that I'm going to take a road slightly less traveled, right? It's still like, I'm still like interning at firms, but I'm going to go to small boutique firms, maybe ones that are unlicensed, because I think that's what's valuable for my education. But then I tried to make it do both things. I tried to also make it work for like licensure and the award and being recognized for it. And those two things were incompatible. So it ended up being a waste of time and money and a disappointment. So the whole point of this just being like, sometimes you have to make decisions that are in your own interest, and they will go against the grain of what the school or the education is pushing on you. And that's okay, because you can get other things out of it. Like, it's not all about, paying your dues and getting licensure and game points. There are other things you can get out of this education, and don't be afraid to pursue those, but at the same time realize that those are compromises you're making, because you're going to pursue something else, which means that you might miss out on something more traditional, but that's okay because you're trying to build a different type of career and get a different type of education.
Yeah, so there's trade-offs, and it sounds to me like there's a confusion of maximizing versus optimizing, right? Like you kind of wanted it both ways, yes, which is like the maximalist.
Yeah, I had my one leg on like two different like boats, and that we're going out to see it, when I should have really just kind of committed to like, no, I want to do an alternative pathway, and that means that I'm not going to get these credits. And then later in my professional life, I once again tried to get those credits through a firm and realized that as a specialist you have to lie if you want to get licensed, basically. And I was done. After that, I canceled all of my accounts because I was like, there is no honest path to licensure for someone, which is crazy, right? Like, working full-time in an architecture firm, I have no legitimate path to licensure just because I specialize. And that was really disappointing to me. And that's when I stopped worrying about that, because I said, well, on the other hand, licensure is not how I define success in my career, and it's not necessarily my objective, and it's also not holding me back from the way that I want to practice architecture or do work in adjacent fields. So again, it's like, don't get greedy. If you make an alternative pathway, that's your choice, and just kind of accept the consequences of that. Or like, you can bitch and complain about the AIA and NCARB all you want as well, and I think that's a good debate to have, but it's your professional choice.
What is something that is exciting that students can look forward to getting into this profession after graduation?
Obviously, like, I have my own interests. I'm kind of in an orbit around architecture these days. I think there's a lot of exciting change happening, right? There are labor movements. There are kind of like backlashes against traditional pedagogy that that have really like overlooked sustainability and ethics and these other kind of components, right? I think we've gone too far in certain directions and have kind of lost our way, and there are people kind of trying to redefine what practice is. And I would say that there's nothing exciting about status quo architecture, but what's exciting is that people are chipping away from the edges of that, and in a lot of different ways, both from the inside and from the outside. And obviously, like the technology aspect of this with robotics and AI and new methodologies of practice and delivery and of building, manufacture, and assembly. Like there's like so many weird little things that you can do. I mean, because if I think about it, I'm trying to think about like, I think when I was in grad school, it was like, that was like the era of like the Gary technology. There were like a few spots and like SOM black box, like there were a few specialist spots, and then that kind of expertise got democratized by tools like Grasshopper and kind of the influx of like Python scripting over other languages and Arduino. Like all that stuff made design computation more accessible to also non-specialists. There are a lot of people who would consider themselves traditional practitioners who use that as one of their tools. And then those people who really excelled with those democratized tools, think of like what Andrew Human is doing with HYPAR. All of a sudden there are like, now there are too many names to mention. I used to be able to name drop, and now it's like there are like 400 people, like whether they're working on the product side of things like I am, or they're working as engineers like Andrew and others are, where there are all these startups that are saying, well, how do we actually design computation systems specifically for the delivery of the built environment? Because we now have this expertise gained from the democratization of it and more generalized like modeling tools, which I think is super exciting. So if you were into technology right now, there'd be a lot of avenues. I don't know if technology is as exciting to students today because they are so immersed in it, whereas it was kind of a rarity when I was in school.
They're just taking it for granted now. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know, it's probably not as exciting, but it was like so mind-blowing to me, when people would talk about scripting or digital fabrication or even like 3D printing, right? Like everybody has like a 3D printer at their desk right now. So maybe it's not quite as exciting, but there are so many opportunities there now, and we're entering an era where these systems are being designed specifically for the industry, which I would, which I think is kind of a first, at least in terms of, we'll say automation systems or systems that capture practice and delivery expertise algorithmically versus other types of technologies like CAD and BIM, which are more about representation and data management. So that's pretty fun and interesting. I just like the chipping away. I like that there are so many people who have kind of come through the industry and are finding different ways to be in it. And they all have like architecture degrees. I also, it's funny, like I work with David Berzik at Trimble very closely because of the work between Trimble and Boston Dynamics, also an MArch. And I find all sorts of people along the way. A lot of my customers who are the innovators bringing technologies like Spot into general contracting work are MArchs. It's been really fascinating. There are a lot of people who understand the complexity of the overall delivery process, and something that I wish I had thought about more when I was younger, although like I think it's natural to come to things later and you don't have to put so much pressure on yourself to do everything at once, but really understanding how the allied trades work together, getting on site. I remember like my freshman year in architecture and my professors being like, don't take an architecture firm job this summer, go to a construction site. And I was like, what do they know? I need to practice as an architect, and went to a local architecture firm. And I was like, no, they were right. It would have been really interesting to just work a site initially and kind of start from the end and work back to get a little bit more perspective there, and to also, you know, kind of understand the business of architecture, because within the, we'll say, AIA standard contract framework, there are certain things you can't do. We talk about like means and methods, but like you can do whatever you want as an entrepreneur, really. So if there are things, you know, understand the framework of traditional practice, and if you like, oh, I actually thought this was going to be different, well, you know, maybe you can make that reality if you have the, you know, the time and the resources and the opportunities.
What I would say is that I think there's a massive amount of potential for architecture in the world. It would be easy for somebody to look at somebody who's in technology, as I am, and say, well, they think they're going to solve all the problems of the built environment with technology. And certainly if you look at what HYPAR does, you might think that that's the case. But living in a nice house that was designed by an architect, as I do, loving spaces that are designed by architects in the way that I do, I understand that there's a potential there that will never be sort of encompassed by technology, but will be augmented by technology. And I think one of the challenges in our industry right now is that there's this sort of friction between the technologies that we use and the idea of how those things will develop to help us be better at design and what it actually means to be a designer. And I think it's a very natural and necessary friction for the evolution of our profession. But I would say for anybody who's entering into the profession right now, you're coming in at a super interesting moment, because there's this undercurrent of people being slightly upset with the way that the consulting, engineering, and architecture model works right now, using terms like race to the bottom in terms of fees. And then there's the tech sector who's saying, well, architects and engineers and contractors, they don't know what they're doing. We're going to solve everything with technology. And those two things are slamming together right now at high speed and ejecting all kinds of like interesting things. Verticalization plays in the industry, modular, prefabrication, things like HYPAR to generate large parts of the building. And what I would say to architecture students is, it's probably the case that the education you're getting right now is not the right education for what you're going to be needing to do to be successful and be powerful, most potent in this industry within the next 2 to 5 years. And that's just because academia has been slow to respond to some of these sea changes that are happening. The question that I'm typically asked is, you know, should we all learn to program? Are we all going to be writing software? And I don't necessarily know that the answer to that is yes. But I would say that there are technological trends out there that are happening now that you will need to hook onto and engage in and pour yourself into. And it's going to take a lot of effort because you weren't taught these things in school, but those things are going to set you on a course to succeed. And those vary everywhere from like figuring out how to be best on top of the tools that you have when you go out and work in practice. I'm going to automate stuff on top of Revit, Rhino, whatever, all the way to near future technologies that we're talking about, like the metaverse. In the future, you might be making a physical asset and then secondarily selling that physical asset or the 3D representation of that physical app in a virtual universe. And your skills as a designer are always going to be necessary in that way. And then the last thing I'll say is that it's a wonderful time to be coming out of school, actually, because the technology that is used, especially around visualization, real-time visualization, and the idea that you can so quickly create a world and inhabit that world with a fidelity to the natural world, it gives you the ability to iterate as a designer so quickly. And it's something that certainly when I was in school, and Evan, probably when you were in school, we didn't have. It was press a button and wait until the next morning to get a rendering, you know? And now you can do all that stuff in real time. So the pace with which we can ideate will necessarily accelerate.
I think you've already kind of answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case it sparks any additional thoughts or ideas, which is, what is something exciting that they have to look forward to?
I think you have new business models in architecture to look forward to. for basically as long as architecture has been separated from buildings, going back hundreds of years now. We've gone into these kind of specializations. Architects work in this office, structural engineers work in this office, contractors work in this other office, and we also inhabit different areas of the design to construction spectrum. The architects start at the very beginning, and then they very quickly bring on the engineers and all their other consultants, and the contractors historically have been down at the end, and the owners are at the beginning. And there's like these places in the timeline you're supposed to operate. Well, one of the amazing effects of technology is that it's allowing all of those people to not only collaborate in a way that they haven't collaborated before, but collaborate at the same time, at the same moment in time as they have before. So construction logistics in terms of prefabrication and modularization are coming all the way back down to design. You're not designing from a blank sheet anymore. You have a kit of parts that you're going to use to express, to bring the building about. And what that's going to result in is all kinds of new models for practicing as an architect that aren't the traditional, concept, schematic, design, development. You might be working more of your career building architectural products than you will doing architectural projects. And I think that's a really exciting shift in our industry.
I think of the ability to get rid of the value engineering phase of a project.
Yeah, I mean, it's been in the 20 years or so that I've been out working now, first in practice and then now in technology, this whole idea of like nobody knows what a building costs. And it's still the case, and even with all the technology that we have and everything else, but as we move towards productizing the built environment, we're going to know more and more and more. And value engineering won't be a thing anymore. It'll just be like, I can use this system over here, which I know is going to cost this much installed, or I can use this system over here, and it's calculated in real time while I'm doing my design and telling me how much things are going to cost.
And by integrating all that experience into this process where things are happening in real time at the same time, you're getting that experience and that feedback right when you need it, right? Like it is just in time. And if you have the table populated with all of those individuals from those different entities, I think that all kind of leads to that outcome.
The thing that I've talked about, and has really, and I'm not just blowing smoke here, this has really been part of the conversation in the last year or around the development of HYPAR and the conversations we're having with the people that we're talking with, is that design cycles, you can think of any design cycle like a big loop, right? The architect puts a design out, and then it has to go to the engineer, and the engineer has to say, well, that doesn't work for this reason. It goes back to the architect changes something in the design. Big design loops. And we've gotten marginally better in the last decade of making those things run kind of in parallel. But what the technologies that we're using now and that are being developed now are going to do are they're going to shrink those design loops smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it's just a point. Until instantaneously you know whether the thing works structurally, you know whether it works environmentally, you know whether it works from a cost standpoint. And I will say honestly, I mean, if people don't believe me, like this is actually happening. We're watching it happen with technology. And what's going to happen is back to that idea of like roles and places in the timeline, it's going to disintermediate some people who had jobs that were the result of this hundreds of years of development of these slow design cycles are just not going to, they're going to have to do something else. And it's also going to open up whole new kinds of opportunities. I mean, the owner over here, the architect here, and the contractor here are going to collapse into a joint entity that is recognizing design in real time as those design cycles shrink down to a point.
Well, Dr. Keough, thank you. I appreciate it.
So I would tell them to value their own ability to become a leader in the future. So we are entering a world globally and socially and in the profession, which is not like anything that has ever been the case before. We're entering a time of climate change and a time of social upheaval, and many people are invested in keeping on doing things the way we've always done them. And young people need to be brave enough and confident enough to say the way things have been done is in many ways disempowering and destructive. And you, meaning you, younger people, need to lead us into a better way of building the world. And it's not going to be easy because there are many, many people who want to keep things going the way they have been. But I think we can all see, and I can see certainly from the perspective of 54 years, that we can't keep doing things the way we have been. So learning what you can from the current leadership, but at the same time knowing that you're going to have to make some changes to it to be able to be successful on a broader scale. I think that's what I would say, which in terms of empowering young people means, again, have faith in your own intelligence and passion, but also be willing to listen to what the good advice from the current leaders are.
Do you see something exciting that they can look forward to?
Oh, yeah. So I love the fact that most architects are generalists. What I'm excited about is that I have now spent a career doing all kinds of different things. Like I was saying, I have veered in and out of traditional practice over the course of a 40-some-year career. And I only see the profession of architecture continuing to get fuzzy and blending with other professions and other strategies and other ways of working and living and being in the world. And so I feel like if at no other time has architecture been more important in terms of how we can meld with the greater design world to make the world better. I'm super optimistic about where we can go as designers. So I see plenty of things to be excited about. I just do think it's important to sort of look at the past and say, well, we've done things a certain way and they haven't worked great. So how can we make them work better? And I'm super optimistic about the future of the design disciplines and specifically architecture as a way of building a better world for ourselves. So yeah, I have all kinds of optimism.
Wasn't that fantastic? There's so much good stuff in there. I hope that you appreciated it, and I hope that something resonated with you. I hope a lot of it resonated with you. Do me a favor before you stop the video and move on to another one. 2 things. No matter where you are in your career, first thing, if you're a student, mid-career, late career, tell people in the comments below what resonated with you. I think that would be fantastic to share. I'd love to get that feedback. What really spoke to you? If you are later on in your career, I would love it if you would leave some advice and contribute to this conversation. We need to do that more, and we don't want the video to end right here. I would love it if you would contribute and let other people know what you think they should do for their early career. Second thing is, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button. Those 2 things will help us get the word out and help this be a resource to even more people. There are no secrets in this video. You should not keep it to yourself. Help us bump it up on YouTube. That would be absolutely fantastic. So hit the like, hit the subscribe. That way you'll know when the next video from us comes out. And let's start this community here on YouTube. That would be absolutely fantastic. So that's all for this video. I hope to see you in the next one. Talk to you soon.